After a little bit of technical difficulties, if you can even call it that, welcome to another episode of the All Cardinals podcast. For Richie Bradshaw, I am Donnie Druin. Richie, before we even get into plenty of things, including the NFL's trade deadline that has now come and gone, Week 9's matchup with the Seattle Seahawks, I am sipping some phenomenal sweet tea right now. It's a Thursday evening. Thursday Night Football is on. How are you?
I'm pretty good, my friend. It's a nice rainy day outside in the surprise area. Cannot speak for the Phoenix area that you're closer to, but weather's beautiful. There's Thursday night football. The nights are coming in a lot earlier than they were. We are in peak football weather.
Oh, for sure. I stepped out the apartment this morning to head out to the Cardinals facility, and I was wearing shorts with like a long sleeve shirt. I'm like, I'll be fine. And then I get there, and the wind, of course, just starts blowing like crazy. I'm like, okay, this is
Right.
exactly what I get for being that guy that's wearing shorts in very cold weather. Short, I think, could be a very good word to describe the amount of patience that Cardinals fans have with general manager Steve Keim and head coach Cliff Kingsbury, especially after a trade deadline that has now come and gone with zero movement. Arizona Sports' John Gamadoro reported that the Cardinals had basically minimal talks with other teams throughout the league. Nothing really picked up traction. So before we dive into some deep detail, just give me your overall thoughts on the trade deadline and what your expectations were for the Cardinals heading into it, and if they met it.
Well, Donnie, we kind of were wondering whether or not this was going to be a team that was going to go all in or not. This is something I very briefly talked about earlier on the website. You guys will have to check out that article if you missed it. But basically, this is kind of a team where it would have made sense to make a move, but I feel like it makes more sense not to make a move. Look, you're sitting right now, you're what, 3-5 on the year, I believe, and it feels like you're treading water more than you are actually making progress towards getting back into the playoffs. The playoffs feel like a very distant possibility for you right now. And there's no use in trying to sell out major resources to try and get to the playoffs this year when you're so far behind the eight ball. Like, if anyone knows what the current odds are for the Cardinals to make the playoffs, that'd be awesome. I actually don't know off the top of my head percentages or scenarios or
Pro
anything like
Football
that.
Focus actually published an article today that gave them about a 20% chance right now as it stands. So
That
if they
feels better than
beat
I would have thought.
Seattle, no, for sure. If they beat Seattle this week, that jumps up to about 30. But if they lose, that puts them to about under 10%. And
Right.
but by that point, you're looking at like a good draft pick. So
Exactly. And I mean, think about it like this. So who was the one guy everyone wanted, right? Bradley Chubb.
mhm.
Bradley Chubb ends up going to Miami. Miami is a playoff team right now. If Arizona wanted Bradley Chubb, there's a few things that go in tune with that. First of all, you got to pay him. You're not paying him as a rental. Arizona doesn't have a ton of cap space. It's not as though they can't maneuver it, because we see teams do it all the time. The Rams and the Saints particularly are incredible at managing the cap. So I don't love going to the cap as an excuse, but trying to get Bradley Chubb under a deal when you just got Kyler Murray a new deal, when you just extended DJ Humphries, when you have DeAndre Hopkins, when you have upcoming guys too, like Byron Murphy is going to need to get paid. Marquise Brown is going to need to get paid. Exactly. You got to take care of your in-house stuff first. Second of all, if you did move that first round pick, you don't make the playoffs. I mean, you just gave Denver like a potential top 10 pick. If Arizona is on pace to finish the way that they are right now, they should be right around a top 10 pick. And giving up a top 10 pick for a 26 or 27-year-old player by the time next year rolls around, and having him already not on a rookie deal, is a very, very big conflict of interest, I would say. Like, obviously you want the proven guy, but I would prefer having that top 10 pick and taking another edge rusher who is 5 years younger and much cheaper. So there's a lot of give and take that kind of went with this. It, in a very long-winded way of me saying that I think it was better that the Cardinals let it pass, but they're rightfully upset if you truly believe that this is a playoff team.
And I think that's kind of how Steve Keim and Kingsbury look at this team. I mean, We touched on it a little bit on Tuesday. Is this a 3-5 football team? No. This team is far too talented to currently have the record that they do, and I think that's where some of the frustration starts to boil in from Cardinals fans.
Right.
But I'm looking at the list of guys right now that were kind of dealt on by far the wildest trade line I have ever seen.
Yes. And I saw someone was saying that if this is going to be the new norm for the NFL, then they need to push the deadline back a few more weeks because but now that it's a 17-game season, this is 47% of the season is completed, whereas the NBA trade deadline comes at like close to 90% of the season's done.
It's in like February or March. I don't remember the exact date, but yeah, it's only a couple months after the season. So I'd say it's right about on par. It's definitely a little bit further past 47%, at least in my opinion. I could definitely be wrong. It would not be the first time. But you look at guys like TJ Hawkinson, Bradley Chubb, who you already touched on, Chase Claypool, Roquan Smith, Calvin Ridley, just a handful of names that were dealt around that deadline. And most of those guys came with not premium aside from Chubb, but like somewhat decent draft capital being attached. I just don't think that's something the Cardinals feel like they need to do at this moment in time. Had everybody been healthy, had Hopkins not been suspended 6 games and they were still rolling in with like a 3-5 record, I would understand it a little bit more. But
Right.
I mean, like, for example, Bradley Chubb, 5-year, $119 million contract. The Cardinals are not paying Bradley Chubb that money.
No.
They simply are not giving him that kind of deal. Is he worth it? Absolutely. He's a phenomenal defensive player. But I think the Cardinals, and I think this is how they think as well, are better off reallocating those resources elsewhere to better help overall improve that football team. Now, that being said, a lot of people point to the Trayvon Mullen trade, the Robbie Anderson trade, and they're like, okay, well, obviously those 2 moves didn't work out. Where do the Cardinals go from here? And I think they don't go anywhere from here. The bottom line, Richie, they believe they are better than a 3-5 football team. They have a tough 3-game stretch coming out to where they believe they can go either 2-1 or 3-0 and get themselves right back in the race for the division, which is basically going to be their guide to a playoff spot. I mean, like, if you and I can sit here and tell everybody that this team is far too talented to be 3-5, how do you think they feel?
100%. They're absolutely entitled to have that kind of frustration pent up towards this franchise. I remember I was talking to my dad about when the Ravens had traded for Roquan Smith, and he had said, I wish that my team would make moves like that when it comes to like being aggressive and stuff like that. And I mean, outside of the DeAndre Hopkins trade, I really can't think of too many other massive moves that the Cardinals have
made. To
be
fair, it's gonna be hard to get a lot more massive than a guy like DeAndre Hopkins.
Sure, no.
But like Zach Ertz was brought in, Rodney Hudson was brought in. Now, granted, like further down the line, that trade doesn't look as good as it once did, but still, in the moment, a very, very good trade. They've brought guys in whenever they needed to. So like Keim has never been afraid to pull the trigger. So if Keim really felt like he needed to improve the football team, you would have seen the Cardinals name pop up on Tuesday. But like they're walking that fine line between buyers and sellers. For example, the Lions trading away TJ Hawkinson, seller. The Steelers trading away Chase Claypool, seller. The Miami Dolphins getting Bradley Chubb, buyer. The Baltimore Ravens getting Roquan Smith, buyer. There are clear buyers and sellers whenever the trade line finally approaches. And the Cardinals are kind of in that like leeway where they can go either or, but they don't feel like they're in position to do either or.
And that's the right way to run your team, is to recognize like, one player is probably not going to put us back into playoff contention. One, Bradley Chubb is not going to magically make all of the issues that are going on with the current Arizona Cardinals go away. Bradley Chubb doesn't fix the offensive line. Bradley Chubb doesn't catch the football and run routes. Bradley Chubb doesn't cover wide receivers. There's only so many things that Bradley Chubb does do for you. It's one of the things that makes football so unique compared to like the NBA, where you can trade for one player because there's 5 guys on the court at a time. Whereas in the NFL, you have 22 starters. So it's hard to justify making big, massive moves like that, like what Miami did for Bradley Chubb, when you're a team like the Cardinals, where, yes, it is a very talented team, but there's a lot of flaws with this team at the same time that are pre-existing. Miami is very close to competing. They are competing, but they're very close to not having as many issues as the Cardinals are.
No, I completely agree. I think bottom line, you need to sit there and ask yourself, is a guy like Bradley Chubb going to come in and dramatically improve this football team? He's a very
Right.
good football player. Is he going to help turn the tide and turn the Cardinals into I guess, perennial playoff team? He's good. But I feel like the answer is no. Whereas compared to a team like Miami, like you talked about, Miami went and got Bradley Chubb. They knew they were going to pay him. They had a cap to pay him. And everybody around the league is like, okay, they're gearing up. They are ready. They now feel like they are ready after going out and getting Tyreek Hill in the offseason, already having a very, very good defense, adding Chubb to that defense now. You're seeing the decline of New England and the AFC East, excuse me. Obviously the Buffalo Bills are still there, and you still have very good teams throughout the AFC, but the Dolphins are making moves that were already kind of in motion prior to the deadline. And now, I mean, they've got to be one of the favorites to at least win a playoff game this year. Whereas I feel like Bradley Chubb on a 3-5 Cardinals team, he might not even sniff the postseason.
Well, here's the other side of that coin too, Donnie, is if Arizona makes that same trade and makes that same contract, are they getting praised? Because I
No.
almost feel like people would look at that as like a very irresponsible move by Steve Keim. Let's say you make the exact same trade. You trade a first round pick, you trade, was it like a third, and then they traded a player too.
Yeah, Chase Edmonds.
If you make that trade and you're Arizona, and instead of Chase Edmonds, let's say you traded, man, I don't even know. But the point is, like, I don't know that you're getting praised the way that Miami is getting praised, because Miami is in a better situation than the Arizona Cardinals are in right now. So that's another thing that I think fans need to remember right now as they're being frustrated, is realize that even if you did make that trade, I don't know if people would appreciate it. I don't know if people would be saying, great move, 100%.
I completely agree. And like, to their point, Richie, like Kyler Murray is now handed the bag. I mean, it's time for this team to start performing. Everybody and their mother, I feel like, got contract extensions last offseason. So like the time to make the dough is now. And they're not exactly making it. I just don't feel like a move at the deadline would have been very beneficial for the Cardinals, at least short term or long term. Obviously, that's very much up for debate. So I mean, we'll leave that to another time. Moving forward, Richie, the Arizona Cardinals host the Seattle Seahawks in Week 9, -1.5 favorites on SI Sportsbook. To be honest, Richie, I don't know how the Cardinals are favored, at least in my eyes. I mean, the Seahawks have won 3 straight games in a row. The last 2 weeks, they've scored 64 points offensively. They're averaging 26.3 points per game, which is, I think, 4th in the NFL last time I checked. Geno Smith is balling out. 9 touchdowns, the 1 interception last month. He's the NFC Player of the Month. And he's completing 70% of his passes. I mean, the Seahawks team is playing very, very well. And at least from the last time they played each other, like 3 weeks ago, I feel like the Seahawks have slowly but like surely climbed up just in terms of level of play. Whereas the Cardinals kind of just meddled there.
Yeah. I think that that's probably the best way and the most polite way that you can put it, is the Seahawks have gotten better. I understand that that is absolute heresy to say to a Cardinal fan, but they have. Geno Smith is playing incredibly well right now. For what it's worth, this had gotten brought up. I can't remember if I've talked to you about this or not. And if I haven't, then I can't remember. Or if I have, then I can't remember if it was on the podcast. But I had seen someone was talking about Geno Smith's kind of breaking out in his late 30s and likened it to the Rich Gannon career, where it took him forever to kind of get going, and then he finally did, and he's a very good veteran quarterback. And that's kind of what it feels like Geno Smith is doing right now, is because he was pretty gosh darn solid for Seattle last year too, in relief for Russell Wilson, and he's got them trending towards the playoffs. They're 5-3, they're first place in the division. This is a much more potent Seahawks team than we thought we were going to see in week 1. And we're now in week 9, 10, week 10.
9.
It is 9. Okay. I'm not crazy. And this is just certainly a much better Seahawks team than what we saw in week 1, let alone compared to what we saw just a few weeks ago against the Cardinals in that 19-9 barn burner. This Seattle team is just 10 times better, Donnie. I don't know. Here's what I'll say. I think the Cardinals can absolutely pull off this game. I think they can get a win here, but it is not going to be easy, and I do not know why they're favorited.
No, I completely agree with you. And it's funny because we talked to Vance Joseph today, the Cardinals defensive coordinator. And before the first time they played the Seahawks, he talked about, the weapons that they have, and, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And, what was kind of going under the radar was Kenneth Gainwell, right? And it's just nobody really had asked about him. And then Vance Joseph kind of spoke up and said, hey, this kid can play. This kid can run the football very, very well. As it turns out, the Cardinals found out the hard way. I believe he rushed for over 90 yards and I believe scored as well. I have to go and double check. But dude, this entire Seahawks team is just not performing. I don't want to say above expectations, but I did not expect the Seahawks to be the first place team in the NFC West in 9 weeks into the season. But I mean, I guess that goes to show any given Sunday or any given stretch of Sundays, anything can happen. Now, Seahawks won 19-9 in their last game. The lone touchdown Arizona scored in Seattle was a special teams blocked punt, recovered in the end zone near the Seahawks goal line. Couldn't really get anything going offensively. Kyler Murray, 222 yards and 1 interception. The last time those two faced off, both defenses are not great. Both were giving up around 25 points per game, around 360, 370 yards per game. And I think that's where you kind of see the sports books liken the Cardinals. Because if you're trusting either Geno Smith or Kyler Murray and their respective offensive weapons and their play calling, coaching, all kind of melted into one, you got to side with the Cardinals, right? Even in the absence of Marquise Brown, you have a DeAndre Hopkins now. You have maybe James Conner returns this week. Maybe, Benjamin, finally gets back going up again, because the Seahawks had one of the worst rushing defenses in the NFL, and everybody picked, Benjamin as a 150-yard guy. And the Cardinals were not able to do anything on the ground.
They couldn't do anything, like you said. I'm going to go ahead and put extra emphasis on that. They absolutely clamped Benjamin. The defense and the offense. Let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. On paper, who has more talent, the Cardinals or the Seahawks?
The Cardinals.
Agreed. But you know what the difference between the Cardinals and the Seahawks is? Coaching. Yep. Pete Carroll, for what it's worth, because he's not as good as he was a few years ago, but there was, at one point in time, there might still be a conversation for him to be a Hall of Fame NFL coach. And that was based off of the ability for him to take the group of guys that they're drafting, continually drafting, and build them up and turn them into guys who are playing better than their draft status, that are playing better than their abilities. Like Bruce Irvin was never a first-round pick, but man, oh man, did they get the absolute most out of him when he was playing with them. He was instrumental in their Super Bowl run. They have all sorts of players that you could name that we don't have time to do. I look at Arizona and I see Cliff Kingsbury and I sit here and I'm like, oh, well, maybe it makes sense why they're not able to get the most out of some of their guys, right? Is Pete Carroll is a great coach. Cliff Kingsbury what's the nicest way to, he's a coach, there. He's a stopgap, I suppose, that you want to pay a lot of money to. He is a classic, Arizona sports example of he's doing just enough, so we're going to keep him around. It is just what Arizona sports seem to love to do. They do it in the colleges with Arizona State and U of A. They do it with the baseball team. They do it with the Cardinals and the Coyotes, and it feels like the Suns. But, yeah, it's just they're getting just enough out of Cliff Kingsbury to keep him around. And then you wonder why a more talented Cardinals team is losing to an inferior Seahawks team. It's because they're being coached better and the guys are buying in. I don't know that the Cardinals players love playing for Cliff the way that the Seahawks players love playing for Pete.
No, I completely agree. Really quick, I said Kenneth Gainwell, and Kenneth Gainwell does not play for
Kenneth
the Seattle
Walker.
Seahawks. Yeah, Kenneth Gainwell plays for the Philadelphia Eagles. Kenneth Walker, um, I feel like I should get like one clean like route ran over me by him just for mispronouncing his name. Kenneth Walker, I have him on fantasy too. It is absolutely disgraceful. Might go for even more yards this week because the Seahawks have slowly but surely been running a little bit more 13 personnel, one running back, three tight ends, which kind of, shows the ability to physically dominate any team at the line of scrimmage, let alone the Cardinals, who now have Rashad Lawrence on injured reserve. And, it's funny. We talked to Vance Joseph about maybe having JJ Watt on a potential snap count that hasn't really gone to plan this year, but you don't want your guys out there for 12 to 16 consecutive plays, no matter how good they are. They try to rotate their defensive linemen a lot, but I just feel like against the Seattle Seahawks team, and here's the big point about to bring up right here. No Budda Baker the last 2 days of practice. He's been a DNP. No Rodney Hudson, who's already been ruled out for the game. And then possibly no DJ Humphries, who missed last week. And then he did not participate in practice either Wednesday or Thursday. Obviously, on Friday, we'll see the actual game statuses for these guys. But things are not looking great for the Cardinals sitting at home, a place where they've struggled the last practically calendar year now to go and win football games, let alone win games within the division. And as betting favorites against the spread, I think Cliff Kingsbury's like 5-14, 5-19, somewhat as like a home favorite against the spread. All those betting numbers aside, Richie, I just don't see how the Cardinals are favored in this game.
I don't either. And again, it just kind of goes back to what we've talked about quite a bit now is how frustrating is that you are a more talented team, but you just probably aren't going to win this game. And like, I really hope I'm wrong. I'm happy for the Cardinals that they're favored in this game. I don't know why they are. Maybe they're assuming that because of what DeAndre Hopkins has been doing in these two games, and
Which is
that
a fair
Arizona, it is a fair point. It totally is. And you didn't have him last time. Maybe that's the difference they're basing it off of. But similar to what we talked about with Bradley Chubb, like DeAndre Hopkins doesn't make the Cardinals a playoff team. Like all of a sudden, adding Bradley Chubb wasn't going to do that. DeAndre Hopkins, they're not. They're 1-1 with DeAndre Hopkins now.
Yep.
Yeah. So
to be fair, they did go on the road to Minnesota, lost by one possession. The offense did show they were able to put up points and kind of not go stride for stride with the Vikings, but they were at least able to keep up for, a very long time in that game. To answer Kyle's question really quick, you actually just missed it. Budda Baker has not practiced either Wednesday or Thursday today. We'll see what the game status is on Friday, but usually guys who miss 2 days in a row like that, not really a good sign. And, sometimes, like, for example, DJ Humphries was listed on the injury report as it did not participate, but I've seen him on the practice field off to the side the last 2 days. So there's at least a little bit of hope for that. I haven't seen Budda in the locker room. I have not seen Budda at the facility, and obviously I have not seen him on the practice field. So I'm not quite sure. It doesn't look absolutely great for Budda this week. So sorry about that, Kyle. Moving back to the Seahawks, though, I think people are looking at this game. There's no way it's 19-9 again, right? I mean, there's just, like, it would be a very NFC West thing for it to happen again, but like it shouldn't, especially with like how well these two offenses can play. Like you said, you already have a DeAndre Hopkins back into the mix. Both defenses are not great. I think they're expecting points to be put up left and right then.
Probably. I don't know why you would run into that again. Kind of like what you said. Like, would it be the most NFC West thing in the world? Yes, it would. But the Cardinals, with the 2 games that Nuke has been back, have not had an issue throwing points up on the board now. Mm-hmm. Seattle is the last 2 games that they've played had 37 points against LA and 27 points against New York. They're also not having an issue throwing up points. This is probably going to be a much better offensive output. Hopefully this is a more entertaining game offensively. But I don't see why it wouldn't be with DeAndre Hopkins being back. And on Seattle's side of things, as of right now, on their injury report, it looks like both their receivers, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, are trending towards playing.
Yeah, but both were upgraded from did not participate to limited today. So obviously a very big sign for those guys and their progress trending towards playing in Week 9 against the Cardinals. Dude, there's so much to kind of digest with this matchup. I think more than anything, and this might even play a factor into it as well, Richie. The Cardinals have their backs against the wall. If they go out and they lose to the Seattle Seahawks Week 9 at home, it puts you at 3-6. And you have basically 2 more games for your season, because if you don't go 2-0 against the Rams and the 49ers in back-to-back weeks, your season's almost done, barring a miracle comeback, storming back through the standings in the last 7 games, somewhere around there, 6 games. You're not making the playoffs. I mean,
No.
this 3-game stretch against the NFC West is now or never, and it all starts basically a new season, Week 1 against the Seahawks right here, right now.
And that's what we talked about earlier this week, is you got to find a way to be 2-1 in these games and find a way to be at least 500 in your conference, because that's going to matter. Even if it's not winning the NFC West to get to the playoffs, if you want a wild card spot, they're going to look at your division record. You need to, at a minimum, break 500 this year if you plan to get to the postseason. This Seattle game is must win, and I don't know what else we can say about it, Donnie. I really don't. Like, you just there's no way you can lose this game.
I agree. No, I completely agree. And just talking to players and coaches this week, they know that too. That the Cardinals are very well aware of the task at hand, but we'll see. We talked on Tuesday on how long Cliff Kingsbury has been able to ride we just got to get it together. We're running out of time. Yeah, you are, Cliff. You are very much running out of time, and you're about to find out how much time you have after 60 minutes of play on Sunday. So I'm taking the Seahawks in that game. I think you already said you are taking Seattle as well.
Yes.
All right. Hopefully we're both wrong, because a happy Cardinals fan base is obviously a very happy fan base to read and listen to everything we put out here at allcardinals.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of the All Cardinals podcast. Go ahead, check me out on Twitter at Donnie and Druin. Check Richie out on Twitter at RichieBrads36. Hope to see you guys after Cardinals win on Sunday. But regardless, we will be here even if your Arizona Cardinals are not. Have a safe weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.